The Duke of Allister surveyed the drawing-room at Blackwood Manor with the detached air of a general reviewing troops of questionable quality. It was the third country house party of the season, and the available stock of debutantes had grown wearyingly familiar. They were all uniformly lovely, uniformly accomplished in the feminine arts of watercolors and the pianoforte, and uniformly, breathtakingly dull. He required a duchess, of course. An heir was a non-negotiable duty, and his vast estates, a kingdom in miniature, demanded a competent chatelaine. But the prospect of shackling himself to one of these simpering creatures for the next 4 or 5 decades was a penance he was not yet prepared to endure. His gaze, clinical and brief, swept past a giggling cluster of pink muslin and settled, for a moment, on a figure in the corner. Miss Ilara Vance. She was not, strictly speaking, part of the marriage market. A distant cousin to their host, Lord Ashworth, she was considered comfortably on the shelf, a permanent fixture in the household, like a useful but unremarkable piece of furniture. She was dressed in a simple gown of deep pewter gray that seemed designed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Her hair was brown, her features pleasant but not arresting. She was neither tall nor short, stout nor slender. She was, in a word, moderate, and she was reading a book. This, in itself, was not unusual. Many young ladies carried books as props, but Miss Vance was not carrying her book. She was consuming it. Her posture was one of complete absorption, her head bent, her brow faintly furrowed in concentration. She turned a page with a quiet, decisive flick of her fingers, utterly indifferent to the social theater unfolding around her. Allister found the sight vaguely irritating. It was a breach of protocol. One was meant to be performing, to be available for conversation, for flirtation, for assessment. Her quiet self-sufficiency was a subtle rebuke to the entire enterprise. Lord Harrington, a man whose primary function in life was to serve as a mirror to his superiors, sidled up to him. "A fine selection this year." "Your Grace," he murmured, his eyes flicking over the debutantes. "Lady Anne is looking particularly radiant, do you not think?" Allister made a non-committal sound. He had already assessed and dismissed Lady Anne. Her conversation was a barren wasteland of platitudes about the weather and her ponies. "And what of Miss Vance?" Harrington asked, his tone laced with a faint, dismissive amusement. He followed the Duke's earlier gaze to the corner, still with her nose in a book. One wonders if she knows how to speak. The Duke felt a sliver of annoyance, not at Miss Vance, but at Harrington for voicing such a predictable, boorish sentiment. Yet, his reply was born of the same casual arrogance. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Oh, she is pleasant enough," Allister said, his voice low and confident. "Quiet. She knows her place." He intended it as a mild, almost forgettable observation. In his world, a woman who knew her place was one who did not cause trouble, did not demand undue attention, did not challenge the established order. It was, from his perspective, a form of praise, however faint. He turned his attention back to the room, the matter of Miss Vance, already forgotten. A piece of dust brushed from his sleeve. He did not see the figure in the shadowed alcove just beyond the corner where Miss Vance was seated. He did not see her retrieve the forgotten cashmere shawl from the back of a chair. He did not see her pause as his voice carried, clear and distinct, in the momentary lull of conversation. He did not see Ilara Vance's head lift from her book. He did not see the way her spine straightened, almost imperceptibly. He did not see the flicker in her calm, intelligent eyes, not of hurt, not of anger, but of a sudden, chilling clarity. She closed her book. The sound was a soft thud, a final, definitive punctuation mark, and in that quiet, sun-dappled drawing room, a door in her mind, one she hadn't even known was ajar, swung silently and irrevocably shut. The next morning, Miss Vance was gone. She had departed at dawn, leaving a polite note for her cousin citing a sudden and pressing family matter. Lord Ashworth was mildly put out, but the house party continued its lumbering festive course. The Duke of Allister did not notice her absence for 2 full days. It was on the second evening that he found himself inexplicably bored. The conversations were circular, the laughter shrill. He wandered into the library, a magnificent room that was, as usual, entirely empty. The chessboard was set up on a small table by the window, where it had been all week, he recalled, with a vague sense of surprise, playing a game with Miss Vance on the first evening. He had expected an easy victory. He was a strategic, logical man, and chess was a game of pure logic. She had played a quiet, defensive game at first, her moves economical and precise. He had grown impatient, launching a bold attack with his queen. He had been so focused on his own brilliant strategy that he had failed to notice the subtle web she had been weaving across the board. Her checkmate had come upon him as a quiet, elegant surprise. She had not gloated. She had simply offered a small, knowing smile and said, "You left your king too exposed, Your Grace." A common mistake when one is focused on conquest. Lo, he had been momentarily stunned, then amused. He had chalked it up to a fluke, a lucky series of moves. Now, standing before the empty board, her words returned to him. A common mistake when one is focused on conquest. There had been an edge to them, a layer of meaning he had failed to register at the time. He dismissed the thought. It was irrelevant. Still, a nagging sense of something missing persisted. It was like a melody that had been playing softly in the background of his week, so subtle he hadn't noticed it until it stopped. He realized he had not had a single interesting conversation since the one about crop rotation. That, too, had been with Miss Vance. They had been walking the grounds, and he had been pontificating to Lord Ashworth about his plans for his own North Fields. Miss Vance, walking silently beside them, had interjected with a single, quiet question. "Have you considered planting clover, Your Grace? The soil in this region is often nitrogen deficient. The clover would enrich it for a wheat crop the following year and provide excellent grazing for the sheep." Ashworth had looked baffled. Allister had been taken aback by the specificity. "And how would you know about nitrogen-deficient soil, Miss Vance?" he had asked, a hint of condescension in his tone. She had not been flustered. "I read a monograph on it, by a Mr. Coke of Norfolk. It was quite fascinating." He had dismissed it as a parroted oddity, a piece of trivia she had picked up from one of her endless books. It was charming, in a peculiar way, but it was not serious knowledge. Now, the memory felt different. It felt substantial. The house party ended. The Duke returned to his principal seat, Allister Court, a sprawling Palladian masterpiece surrounded by 10,000 acres of the finest land in England. The business of being a duke consumed him. Rents to be collected, tenants to be heard, correspondence to be answered. And yet, the strange, hollow feeling lingered. The vast, silent halls of his home felt more silent than usual. His perfectly run household, managed by the impeccable Mrs. Gable, seemed to lack a certain something. He could not put his finger on it. He was present, and he was absent. He was there, and he was not there. On Thursday afternoon, his solicitor was announced. Mr. Fletcher was a thin, dry man who had served the Allister estate for 40 years. He was entirely without sentiment and possessed a mind like a steel trap. He was not prone to social calls. "Your Grace," Fletcher began, foregoing any pleasantries, "I have come about the Greywood property." Greywood Manor was a small, handsome estate that bordered Allister Court to the east. Its owner, an elderly baronet, had died a few months prior, and the property was for sale. Allister had been meaning to purchase it, to absorb its 500 acres into his own, but he had not been in any particular hurry. It was a foregone conclusion. Who else would buy it? "Yes, Fletcher?" "Have the heirs accepted my initial offer?" the Duke asked, already reaching for a pen to sign the necessary documents. Fletcher's face remained a mask of professional neutrality. "There is no offer to accept, Your Grace. The property was sold yesterday." Allister put down the pen. He stared at his solicitor. "Sold? To whom?" I was not aware there were any other interested parties. The offer was made on Monday. It was a private sale, and significantly above the asking price. The transaction was concluded this morning. All cash. Alistair felt a surge of pure aristocratic indignation. The impertinence of it. Someone had dared to poach his land. "And the buyer's name?" he demanded, his voice cold. Mr. Fletcher consulted a document in his hand, though the Duke had the distinct impression the man knew the name by heart. The deed was registered in the name of a Miss Elara Vance. The name hung in the air of the grand, silent library. It seemed at once utterly incongruous and terrifyingly familiar. "Miss Elara Vance?" Alistair repeated, the name tasting strange on his tongue. The cousin of Lord Ashworth? It was impossible. It made no sense. A quiet spinster who lived on the charity of her relatives did not purchase estates for cash. "The very same. Your Grace," Fletcher said, his gaze unwavering. "It appears Miss Vance is the sole heir of her late father, Mr. Jonathan Vance, of Vance Shipping. His fortune was, to use a technical term, colossal. Vance Shipping. The Duke knew the name. A titan of industry, a man who had built an empire from nothing. He had died years ago, but his name was still spoken with reverence in the city. It had never occurred to anyone to connect the quiet, bookish Miss Vance with that kind of power, that kind of wealth. She had hidden it, or rather, society had simply failed to look. And then, the pieces began to slot into place, each one a small, sharp shock to his system. Anaphora began to beat a rhythm in his mind. He thought about the chessboard, and her quiet, devastating victory. He thought about her comment on crop rotation, not parroted trivia, but the informed opinion of a landowner. He thought about her complete absorption in her book, not as an escape, but as the action of a woman with a rich inner life who did not require the approval of a drawing room to feel complete. He thought about her sudden departure from the house party, the day after he had made his pronouncement. And finally, with the force of a physical blow, he heard his own voice, arrogant and dismissive, echoing in the cavernous space of his memory. "She knows her place." A short, sharp laugh escaped his lips. It was a sound devoid of humor. It was the sound of a man realizing the full, breathtaking scale of his own foolishness. She knew her place, indeed, and her place, it seemed, was now a 500-acre estate on his border. An estate he had wanted, an estate she had taken from him with the quiet, effortless precision of a queen capturing a pawn. This was not a coincidence. This was a response. This was a statement. It was the most elegant, most incisive, most devastating riposte he had ever witnessed. She had not slapped his face or engaged in a hysterical confrontation. She had simply bought the place next door. The sheer audacity of it, the brilliance of it. He looked at Fletcher, who was watching him with an expression that might have been pity, or perhaps, just perhaps, a flicker of profound respect for the new owner of Greywood Manor. "It seems," the Duke said slowly, the words feeling heavy and inadequate, "that I have made a significant error in judgment." Fletcher gave a small, dry cough. "Indeed, Your Grace. A common mistake. When one is focused on conquest." The solicitor was quoting her. He had heard the story of the chess game. The realization that his staff, his solicitor, likely the whole county, now understood the situation better than he had, was the final, humbling turn of the screw. He was not the puppet master. He was the puppet. He stood up, the carefully constructed edifice of his ducal authority feeling suddenly fragile. He needed to see her. He did not know what he would say. The usual tools of his station power, money, influence, were useless here. She had her own money. She had just demonstrated her own power. And her influence was currently wreaking havoc on his carefully ordered mind. "Have my horse saddled, Fletcher?" he commanded, his voice tight. "Of course, Your Grace. Will you be riding to Greywood?" The question was unnecessary. They both knew the answer. The ride to Greywood Manor was short, barely 15 minutes across the rolling parkland that separated the two estates. For generations, it had been Alistair land. Now, as he passed a newly erected stone marker indicating the boundary, he felt like a trespasser. The house itself was a handsome, compact Jacobean building of warm, honey-colored stone. It had been neglected in recent years, but even now, it possessed a quiet dignity. He had expected to be met by a flustered butler and a household in chaos. Instead, a calm, efficient-looking woman of middle years answered the door. A small army of maids and workmen were already busy, cleaning windows, polishing floors, and carting away shrouded furniture. The air hummed with quiet purpose. "I am the Duke of Alistair," he announced, his voice sounding pompous even to his own ears. "I am here to see Miss Vance." "Her Grace is in the library," the housekeeper said, her use of the honorific both premature and pointedly deliberate. She did not seem impressed by his title. She led him not to a formal receiving room, but down a dusty corridor towards the west wing. The library was a shambles, but a structured shambles. Books were piled everywhere, on the floor, on chairs, on ladders. In the center of the room, standing before a large table, was Elara. She was not wearing pewter gray. She was in a practical dress of dark blue cotton, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows, a smudge of dust on her cheek. She was not reading a book. She was cataloging them. A ledger opened before her as she examined each volume, her handwriting a swift, neat script. She looked up as he entered, her expression perfectly composed. There was no surprise, no triumph, only a cool, waiting stillness. She looked like a queen in her throne room, and he, the visiting, slightly irrelevant dignitary. "Your Grace," she said, her voice even. "An unexpected pleasure. I was not aware we were to be neighbors." The sheer, breathtaking nerve of it almost made him laugh again. "I believe you were perfectly aware, Miss Vance," he said, stepping over a pile of leather-bound poetry. "One hears rumors," she allowed, setting down a copy of Virgil. "But I have found it is rarely wise to act upon them. One must secure one's own position first." Her choice of words was deliberate, a surgical strike. He felt it land. He walked closer, stopping on the other side of the large table. It felt like a battlefield. The books, their fortifications. He had come here intending to... What? Demand an explanation? Intimidate her? All his impulses were those of a man accustomed to power, and all of them were useless. He decided on the only weapon he had left, the truth. "I was wrong," he said. The words were stark, stripped of all ducal artifice. She tilted her head, a gesture of polite inquiry. She was going to make him work for it. "Wrong, Your Grace? About what, precisely? The quality of the soil on the North Fields, perhaps?" The witty, intelligent woman from the chess game was here, but now her wit was not a charming diversion, it was a rapier. "About you," he said, his voice quiet. "I was wrong about you. I said something foolish, arrogant, at Lord Ashworth's party." "Did you?" she asked, her eyes wide with a feigned innocence that was more damning than any accusation. "I must confess, the conversations at such events are often so trivial, they are forgotten the moment they are uttered." She was dismissing him, just as he had dismissed her. The perfect, brutal symmetry of it was not lost on him. "I was speaking to Harrington," he pressed on, determined to see this through. I said that you knew your place." He watched her face for a reaction, for a flicker of the hurt he now knew he must have caused. There was nothing, only that calm, unnerving composure. "And so I do," she said softly. She gestured around the room, at the piles of books, the ledger, the view of the rolling hills from the tall, mullioned window. "It took me some years to secure it, but I find I am quite content with it. I hope you will be as content with yours." It was a dismissal, a polite, impeccably worded, final dismissal. She was turning back to her ledger, the audience concluded. He felt a surge of something he could only identify as panic. It was the terror of a man watching something of immense, previously unrecognized value slip through his fingers. He had come here to atone for an insult, but he was realizing, with dawning horror, that what he truly wanted was something else entirely. He did not want her forgiveness. He wanted her attention. "Your father was Jonathan Vance," he said, the words a statement, not a question. She paused, her hand hovering over a book. "He was. You must have found society tedious," he said. It was a guess, an intuitive leap. For the first time, a genuine emotion flickered in her eyes, a wry, weary amusement. "Society is a necessary stage, Your Grace. One learns the costumes and the lines. It is a means to an end, or, in my case, a way to pass the time while waiting for one's inheritance to mature. You could have married anyone," he said, thinking of the colossal fortune Fletcher had mentioned. "You could have had a title. Why live as a poor relation and be valued for my father's bank balance?" she countered, her voice sharp. "To be acquired, like a prize mare, by a man who would then manage my affairs and grant me an allowance? I think not. I preferred to be invisible. It is a position of great power, invisibility. People say things they would not otherwise say. One learns the truth of them. One learns the truth of them." The words were a direct hit. He had revealed his truth to her, and she had acted upon it. "This purchase," he said, gesturing around the room. "It was because of what I said." She finally looked at him directly, her gaze level and piercing. "What you said, Your Grace, was merely a catalyst. It was the final piece of data in a very long study. You confirmed a hypothesis I have long held, that men of your station do not see women. They see reflections of their own needs, a mother for their heir, a hostess for their parties, a quiet ornament for their drawing room. You did not see me, the person. You saw a category." She was right. He had done exactly that, and in his blindness, he had missed the most interesting, the most vital, the most alive woman he had ever met. "I see you now," he said, and the words felt more true than anything he had ever said in his life. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "Do you? Or do you see a wealthy heiress who has bested you? An intriguing challenge? Be honest, Your Grace. Your interest was piqued not when I checkmated you, but when my solicitor outbid yours." He could not deny it. The thought was shaming. His pride, his competitive instinct, had been the trigger, but it was not the whole story. The epiphany had been about more than just land or money. It had been about the shocking revelation of a person he had utterly failed to perceive. "My interest," he said carefully, choosing his words as if navigating a minefield, "was piqued when I realized I had been a fool, a blind, arrogant fool. And I find I have no desire to continue being one." He took a step back, away from the table. He ceded the field to her. "This is your home, Miss Vance. I will not intrude further. But I would consider it an honor if you would permit me to call on you again, as a neighbor." He bowed, a formal, correct gesture, and turned to leave. "Your Grace," she said, her voice stopping him at the door. He turned. "The west-facing wall of this library suffers from damp," she said, her tone purely conversational. "The pointing is failing. I will have my mason see to it. You might wish to have your own workmen check the east-facing wall of your library. The buildings are of a similar age and construction. It is likely you have the same issue." And then she turned back to her books. It was not an invitation. It was not an acceptance. It was a piece of practical advice, given from one landowner to another. It was a new language, a new set of terms. And as he walked out of Greywood Manor and into the afternoon sun, the Duke of Allister understood that his courtship of Miss Alara Vance had just begun, and it would be conducted entirely on her terms. The following weeks unfolded into a strange and delicate campaign. Allister, for the first time in his life, was forced to think, to strategize, not for conquest, but for consideration. He did not send flowers. The gesture felt trite, insulting. Instead, after a week of research, he sent a first edition of Coke of Norfolk's monograph on agriculture, accompanied by a simple card, so that you need not rely on memory. The response was a single basket of clover, delivered by a gardener, with no note at all. He found it inexplicably amusing. It was a conversation, conducted through couriers and botany. He learned the rhythms of her new life. He saw her walking the fields with a surveyor, her sensible boots striding through the mud. He saw her directing workmen from the front steps, her voice clear and decisive. He saw lights burning in her library late into the night. She was not playing at being a lady of the manor. She was building an enterprise. He made his first formal call a fortnight after his initial visit. He was shown into a small, elegant drawing room, freshly painted in a pale, watery blue. The furniture was tasteful but sparse. It was a room that was still finding its identity, much like its owner was now allowing hers to be seen. Elara served the tea herself. "You will forgive the simplicity, Your Grace. I have let most of the previous staff go. I find I prefer a household run on efficiency rather than ceremony." "I am beginning to see the appeal," he said, accepting a cup. "My own home employs 87 people. I am not certain I could name half of them. And yet, you are responsible for their livelihoods," she said, her gaze direct. "That is the part of inheritance that is so often overlooked. It is not a prize. It is a burden of responsibility." They spoke for an hour. They did not speak of the weather or of society gossip. They spoke of drainage tiles and tenant contracts, of the falling price of wool and the potential of new milling technologies. He found himself speaking to her not as a man speaks to a woman, but as he would speak to Fletcher or to his estate manager. He laid out a problem he was having with a tenant farmer on his southern border, a man who was consistently late with his rent, but whose family had farmed the land for 200 years. He had expected a conventional, sentimental response. "Oh, the poor man, you must be lenient." Instead, she listened intently and then asked a series of sharp, practical questions. What is his yield per acre? Has the soil been tested? Is his equipment sound? Perhaps the rent is not the issue. Perhaps his methods are outdated. To forgive his debt is to treat a symptom. To improve his yield is to cure the disease. Have you considered investing in a new seed drill for him? As a loan, to be paid back from the increased profits. He stared at her. It was a brilliant, compassionate, and ruthlessly practical solution. It preserved the man's dignity while ensuring the estate's profitability. It was something he had never once considered. "That," he said slowly, "is an excellent idea." "It is merely logic," she said, with a small shrug. "Business is logic. Emotions are for poetry." And yet, he was beginning to feel a great deal of emotion. It was a disorienting blend of respect, admiration, and a profound, frustrating attraction. He wanted to impress her, and he had no idea how. His title meant nothing. His wealth was irrelevant. All he had were the contents of his own mind, and he was beginning to suspect they were far less furnished than hers. His visits became a weekly ritual. He would ride over on the pretext of discussing a boundary fence or a shared stream, and they would end up in her library, now tidy and organized. Maps spread across the great table, debating the future of English agriculture. He learned the history of Vance Shipping, of her father who had loved her fiercely and taught her everything he knew, lamenting only that she had not been born a boy so she could inherit the company. Upon his death, the company had been sold, the proceeds placed in a trust she could not touch until her 30th birthday or her marriage. "I chose to wait for my birthday," she had told him simply, and he had understood everything about the quiet, patient years she had spent in the drawing rooms of her relatives. One afternoon, Lord Harrington came to call at Allister Court. He was bursting with gossip. "Allister, have you heard the most absurd thing?" he brayed, accepting a glass of sherry. "That little brown mouse, Miss Vance, has set herself up as Lady of the Manor at Greywood. They say she's tearing the place apart. Utterly clueless, of course. A woman trying to run an estate. It will be in ruins within a year. You should buy it from her then for a song. A cold, precise anger settled over the Duke. It was the same dismissive tone, the same casual cruelty he himself had once used. He saw his own past foolishness reflected in Harrington's sneering face, and he found it repulsive. "You are mistaken, Harrington," Alistair said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Miss Vance is not clueless. In fact, I would venture that she has a finer grasp of estate management than any man in this county, myself included." Harrington gaped at him. "You jest, surely." "I am not jesting," Alistair continued, standing up. "I have been advising her on some small matters, and her insight is remarkable. Her plans for Greywood are innovative and will, I suspect, be enormously profitable. She is a credit to the neighborhood." He paused, letting his words sink in. "And I will not have her disparaged in my home. Is that understood?" The threat was unspoken but unmistakable. Harrington, a man whose entire social standing depended on the goodwill of men like Alistair, turned a pale, mottled color. He stammered an apology and made his escape as quickly as possible. Alistair knew the story would be all over the county by nightfall. The Duke of Alistair, champion of the spinster of Greywood. He had publicly defended her. He had publicly tied his reputation to hers. It was a decisive action, and it felt profoundly, deeply right. That evening he received a note from Greywood. It contained only 3 words. "My wall is secure." He understood. She knew what he had done. It was her version of a thank you. It was also a reminder. She could defend herself, but she acknowledged his defense of her. A wall between them had been fortified, but perhaps another, more intangible one, had begun to come down. The rebuilding period, as he came to think of it, was slow. Trust was not a thing to be demanded, but earned. He learned to listen more than he spoke. He learned to ask her opinion and genuinely consider it. He found himself changing his own long-held plans for the Alistair estate based on her suggestions. He was not just courting a woman, he was entering into an intellectual partnership. One crisp autumn day, he found her not in the library, but in a small, neglected apple orchard at the far edge of her property. She was on a ladder, a basket at her side, carefully pruning the dead branches from an old, gnarled tree. "They are Newton pippins," she said as he approached, not bothering to come down. "A rare variety. The previous owner let them go to ruin. But the rootstock is good. With a few years of hard pruning, they might bear fruit again." She was talking about the trees, but he knew she was talking about something else entirely, about things of value being neglected, about the potential for restoration, about the patience required to bring something back to life. He looked up at her, her face smudged with dirt, her hair escaping its pins, the late afternoon sun catching in her intelligent eyes. She was not beautiful in the conventional drawing-room sense. She was something far more potent. She was real. He knew in that moment that his campaign was over. The logic and strategy had fallen away, replaced by a simple, terrifying, and undeniable truth. He was in love with her. He loved her mind, her resilience, her quiet strength. He loved the way she saw the world, not as it was, but as it could be. "Ilara," he said, using her given name for the first time. It felt both strange and perfectly natural. She stopped her work and looked down at him. Her expression was unreadable. "I did not come here to discuss orchards," he said. "I came here to make a new proposal." "I am not selling Greywood, Your Grace," she said, her voice crisp. "I am not asking you to," he replied. "I thought, when this began, that I needed a duchess who knew her place. A quiet, biddable woman to run my home and provide me with an heir." He walked to the base of her ladder and looked up at her. "I was a fool. I do not need a woman who knows her place. I find I need a woman who makes her own. And I would be the most fortunate of men if you would consider making your place beside me. He did not offer her his title as a prize. He did not speak of his wealth or his power. He spoke only of what he had learned. I do not want to acquire you, Elara. I want to join with you. I do not want to absorb your lands into mine. I want to tear down the fences between them. I want to build something new, together, a partnership. Of minds, and of estates, and of lives. He paused, his heart hammering in his chest. I was blind, he said softly, and you have taught me how to see. And I find I never wish to look away. She remained silent on the ladder for a long, agonizing moment. He could hear the rustle of the leaves, the distant call of a bird. He had laid himself bare. He had no power here, no advantage. He could only wait for her verdict. Slowly, deliberately, she began to climb down the ladder. When she reached the ground, she stood before him, her gaze searching his. "Are you certain, Alistair?" she asked, her voice quiet but intense. "This is not a game of chess. There are no winning moves. Only consequences. I have never been more certain of anything in my life," he said. She looked at the old gnarled apple tree, then back at him. A small, genuine smile finally broke through her composure, a smile that lit her entire face. "The rootstock is good," she said softly. "Perhaps it is worth the effort." A year later, the gates between Alistair Court and Greywood Manor were gone. The stone boundary markers had been removed, and the two estates were now one seamless expanse of thriving parkland and productive fields. The marriage of the Duke of Alistair and Elara Vance had been the talk of the season, a union that had baffled society but made perfect, irrefutable sense to anyone who saw them together. The Duchess of Alistair was unlike any duchess that had come before her. She spent more time in the estate office than in the drawing room. Her ledgers were more famous than her dinner parties. She had transformed Greywood into a model of agricultural innovation, and its profits, managed under her sole authority, were the envy of the county. She had not been absorbed into his world. She had expanded it, enriched it, improved it. They were a team, a partnership. One summer evening, Alistair found her walking along the path that led to the old apple orchard. She was several months with child, and she carried the new weight with the same quiet competence with which she carried everything else. He fell into step beside her, his hand resting gently on the small of her back. They walked in comfortable silence for a time, a silence that was no longer empty, but full of unspoken understanding. "Fletcher tells me," she said, her tone light, "that Lord Harrington is taken to breeding prize-winning pigs. He says it is the only way he can be assured of intelligent company." Alistair laughed, a deep, genuine sound. "I defended you against him," he recalled. "In my library. It felt like a great victory at the time." "It was," she said, stopping by the first of the gnarled apple trees. "It was the first time you acted not out of pride, but out of principle." The tree was transformed, the dead wood was gone, and healthy new growth sprouted from the old branches. Small, hard green apples, full of promise, clustered among the leaves. It was bearing fruit again. He looked from the tree to his wife, her serene face bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. He remembered the arrogant, bored man who had stood in Lord Ashworth's drawing room, passing judgment on a woman he could not be bothered to see. He remembered the profound, world-altering shock of realizing his mistake. That man seemed like a stranger to him now, a character from a poorly written play. He had thought he needed a duchess who was an ornament, a quiet reflection of his own status. He had ended up with a partner, a force of nature, a woman who looked at the world and saw not just what was, but what could be built. She knew her place. Her place was here, beside him. Her place was in the ledgers, in the fields, in the libraries. Her place was wherever she chose to make it. And his place, he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, was to spend the rest of his life being grateful that she had, against all odds, chosen to make it with him. He watched as she reached out and touched one of the small, nascent apples, a gesture of quiet satisfaction, of work well done, of a future taking root. The act of seeing, he now understood, was the true beginning of love. And he was finally, truly, seeing.